My name is Eric Skwarczynski, and you're listening to episode number 005 of Gut Reactions. Just a quick heads up, while we're not going to go out of our way to spoil anything specifically, we may slip here or there. So if you're not super familiar with Stephen King's work, you may want to become acquainted with it before listening to this episode, because there's definitely going to be a couple spoilers lying ahead. There are many masters of horror, but only one is king. Today on Gut Reactions, we are discussing prolific author Stephen King, a man with 93 books and 72 film and TV adaptations to his name. But I'm not talking about Stephen King alone. I'm here with my mom, Marbeth Skwarczynski, who will be joining me for the episode. So, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Aside from being a great mom, my mom is also a literature teacher for a Christian school. And so she definitely knows the book side of Stephen King. So we're going to get into that perspective. But first, I want to ask you a couple questions about your horror background.
Okay.
What was your first experience with horror?
My first experience with horror is not movies, weirdly enough. My first experience with horror was when I was a very young child. I used to read Andersen's fairy tales and Perrault's fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales, all of which are definitely treading that line of the horror genre. I also grew up in a household where the Bible was read rigorously every night, and my favorite stories from the Bible were Jael, the woman who actually punctured a man's head and nailed him to the floor of her tent, and Ehud and Eglon, where someone was actually gutted. So the idea of all of a sudden this twist happening in a story where it just kind of shocks you. You can't believe that something so grotesque could happen. I've always been really interested in that aspect of storytelling.
So what about cinematic horror? What was your first experience there?
I really don't remember, because when I was growing up, I could read horror, but I never really got into watching horror. But when I was babysitting, it was kind of the rule, unspoken rule in high school in the 80s, that if the people you were babysitting for had HBO, you were required to watch HBO as soon as the kids went to sleep. And sometimes there were horror movies on, and I would try to watch it, and I would get so freaked out, and I'd have to turn it off. I remembered a scene very vividly where someone is swimming in a pool, and the pool actually opens up and that person gets eaten. And that made it difficult for me to swim at night for a very long time. I still did it, but I was, white knuckling the whole time. And another instance where someone is giving a person CPR and their hands going into the chest cavity instead, the chest cavity opening and actually biting off their arms.
Clear.
I really kind of avoided horror until I did see Psycho as an adult, loved the storytelling. Then as I became an older adult and I had a child who really enjoyed horror.
Who was that?
You! We used to do this thing, and it's one of the things I really loved the most about having kids was I wanted to get involved in their interests. For you were so interested in movie making that anytime you wanted to watch a movie, I wanted to watch it with you. And so we started this whole thing called Movie Monday. And you were really into the horror genre, so I sucked it up and I watched horror movie after horror movie after horror movie with you. And some of them I thought were kind of lame.
Like what?
I thought some of the special effects in, let's see, I'm going to get the names wrong. Day of the Dead? The Mall?
Dawn of the Dead?
Dawn of the Dead. I thought some of those were a little cheesy, but I thought the story was tight. Okay?
Well, that wraps up today's episode. No.
But Night of the Living Dead, I thought was excellent storytelling and very good cinematic quality. I loved the story there.
So obviously I kind of introduced you to movie horror.
Yes.
So when do you remember, because I don't know off the top of my head, I remember Psycho being my first, talk about that on the show.
Right.
Being my first experience I remember. Do you remember me being interested in like scary stories or horror or scary images before that?
Yes.
Okay.
Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom.
Oh, that's true.
That is a horror movie.
Yeah.
It is outright flat out horror movie, and you loved that movie. It
It's
was
still
my
my
least
favorite.
It was my least favorite of the Indiana Jones movies. My favorite is The Last Crusade. But you loved that movie, and we watched that movie a lot.
Yeah.
But if she screamed one more time, so help me, I was about to throw something at the TV. She just annoyed me.
The biggest trouble with her is the noise.
When you were 2, I liked supernatural stuff, and I really loved the storytelling aspect of horror. But when you were 2 years old, a TV show came out, and I was really excited when I heard about it, and I started watching it right away. It was called Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And every week, like clockwork, I was sitting in front of the TV and watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. You were not allowed in the room at the time because we were afraid that you and your brother would just become horrified by it.
Which is probably true.
It is true. You would have been scared. But I watched that all the way through, all 7 seasons, and went on. I watched Angel, so I've been a fan of the horror / comedy drama. As long as it has really good storytelling, I'm there. I'm ready for that.
What makes a good horror story?
A really good horror story, and I'm going to use Stephen King as the example here. A really, really good horror story takes the horror of everyday living and adds a twist. A little bit of supernatural, a little bit of psychosis, a little bit of really not understanding where your feet are planted. I think that makes a really good horror story.
It's funny you said that because I've been binge watching interviews with Stephen King getting ready for this, and Stephen King was talking about the fact that, I don't believe in vampires, I believe in killers.
Vampires, werewolves, I don't believe in those things, but I believe in murderers. I believe in the stranger that might come to your house in the middle of the night and knock on the door and then come in and kill you. A vampire is a life stealer. A murderer is a life stealer. One is a metaphor for the other. And a vampire is a little bit safer because we know that that's make-believe, and we can laugh at our own fears and say, well, I pretended for a while. You understand what I mean? When there are real things to be afraid of.
So you agree with...
My view is that the monsters always get us in the end. The monster might be cancer. The monster might be a stroke. The monster might be a heart attack. But in the end, the monsters will get me, and the monsters will get you. The biggest fears are too large to escape our mouths. Even in a scream, when our mouths stretch open all the way, the very large fears can't escape. The fear of the deaths of loved ones, the fear of some horrible disease where we'll waste or rot away a little bit at a time. These are things we're all afraid of, but they're in our hearts and they're in our nerves.
He's absolutely right, because growing up, I was in a very scary situation. I had a brother who was not okay mentally. I don't know if it was mental or behavioral. I do believe that if he was tested, he would have been found to be psychotic. But he ended up getting involved with drugs pretty early on, and that didn't help the psychosis. Yeah. So sometimes I was left alone with him. My parents didn't really understand how bad it was, and he would chase me through the house with a knife, and that was terrifying. So that could be why I never really got into horror stories. I kind of had one that I was living in for a while, from the time I was about 7 to 10, and then we moved away from him for a while, and after that, there's some stuff in your real life that is terrifying, and you just kind of learn to deal with it and roll with it. But then when you read it in literature, you get into the story, and it's nice that these things have an ending that, you have an ending.
Yeah.
The ending is
good. There's catharsis to it.
Yes.
Before we get into Stephen King, I want to talk about what we've been watching or reading. I haven't been able to watch a lot of movies lately, but that's because I've been binge watching Channel Zero, which I don't know if you've heard of Channel Zero.
From your podcast, yes.
Okay, so I'm watching. I haven't seen the first 2 seasons, but it's an anthology, so you can get away with that. So I'm watching season 3, which is Butcher's Block, and I'm addicted. It's like I think 7 episodes. I'm 6 episodes in, and if we weren't doing this right now, that's probably what I'd be watching. And the only way I can describe it is, if my elevator pitch would be, it's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Stanley Kubrick. So, yeah, it's very much dream logic and these very interesting big worlds that I don't know how much they'll give closure, but I'm okay with them not giving any. But it's a really interesting show. So I've been watching that. I watched a non-horror thing called Being Elmo, which is a documentary about the puppeteer that plays Elmo. And last night I watched Carrie to prepare for the episode because I've watched all Stephen King's main adaptations over and over again, and Carrie was the only one I was kind of rusty on.
Okay.
So rewatch Carrie. I won't talk too much about it because I'm sure we'll talk plenty about Carrie. What have you been watching? Have you watched anything worth mentioning?
I have been watching Criminal Minds because everybody I've talked to has said, you need to watch Criminal Minds. So I've been watching it, and I do enjoy the psychological profiling. I really find that interesting. When I was, first time I went to college, I was looking at going into psychology because I liked learning how the mind works, both the chemical reaction and the nurturing aspect. I like that idea that discipline, and I find that works in literature as well. In fact, I wrote a literature book this year where I talk about the nature versus nurture argument in mythology and how important that is. And we still use that argument today for talking about serial killers and what makes them who they are. They could come from a really good background, have textbook perfect parents, and still turn out to be real wackadoos. That's the technical term.
Is Criminal Minds something you'd recommend?
Yes, absolutely. It's very good. Very well done.
All right. It's got Greg in it. Greg? Darman Greg.
Oh, it has, darn. I was like, oh, which Greg?
Trying to reach to your side real quick.
I'm thinking Greg Nicotero, so I was thinking your side.
No, okay. I'm glad you know Greg Nicotero.
Of course I do.
Okay, so let's get into the topic at hand. Let's talk about Stephen King. And obviously, I mentioned he's had, nearly 100 books published,
right.
70 some adaptations of those movies, sometimes books adapted multiple times in different ways. The Shining twice, Carrie.
Second time's better.
Carrie with an unofficial sequel. You have It with a new release in the 1990s.
Yes.
So I want to figure out what makes a Stephen King story a Stephen King story. I was listening to an interview. I said I've been binge watching lots and lots of interviews with Stephen King. And I'll put a link in the show notes to what exactly I was watching in case anyone's interested in following in my footsteps. But I was listening to one, and Stephen King was asked if he ever considered putting out a book under a pseudonym. Mm-hmm. And so that way the name Stephen King wouldn't help with book sales. It wouldn't help with how people perceive the story. It wouldn't weigh on people a certain way. And when he was asked that question, he brought up a story about the Beatles.
It reminds me of a story about the Beatles at the height of the Beatlemania craze, where Paul McCartney came, they couldn't go anywhere. And when they played, at Shea Stadium, nobody could hear the music because everybody was screaming so loud. And Paul McCartney went to John Lennon one day and said, have you ever thought that we could play a few shows as the Masked Bandits? And we would go on stage and we'd be wearing masks and we'd play clubs. Nobody would know who we were, and we could see if we could, put a show across that way. And Lennon laughed and said, after 5 notes, they'd know who we were. And that's the thing about once you've published a number of books, there's a kind of a face print, there's a fingerprint, there's a whole personality thing.
He has such a distinct, way he tells stories and different touches he adds. So my question for you, the lit genius, is what makes Stephen King's stories recognizable? Why can someone pick up a Stephen King book and know who wrote it?
His clarity of thought. He has a really excellent idea of where he's going in the story. There is no hemming and hawing. There's no dead space. With the exception of It. I think there was a little dead space in It that could have been cut. But for the most part, I think he looks at the horror of everyday life and just adds that twist, which I appreciate. We've all had those horrific moments that we've tried to bury, or we've just kind of, flushed them out of our system. They come back to haunt us, just like all of these mystical creatures he comes up with come back to haunt you. He doesn't believe in any of those creatures, which is, I think, his saving grace. The fact that he doesn't really believe them, but he sees them as, here is how bad life can be. Now let's add a little more to it and see how much you can handle.
Why do Stephen King's stories, since he doesn't believe in what he's doing, why don't his stories come across cold and clinical and formulaic, if you will?
Because they're all from the heart, every single one of them. It's dealing with, how am I supposed to be the best father to my son when I have a problem with alcoholism, when I have a problem with my temper, when I have a problem with not being employed. Those are real problems, and those are horrific problems. And then you add that to, and by the way, my son is psychic. And by the way, I'm working at a hotel that is trying to kill me and my family. Then you amp it up a little bit and you see the person devolve, the main characters devolve as they are trying so desperately to survive. But they can't survive. Nobody gets out alive.
So let's talk. You brought up, dealing with children.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about one of the things Stephen King uses a lot as a storytelling device is children.
Right.
Main characters in it, primary character in The Shining. Kids are a big part of Salem's Lot. Why do you think he so often goes to children?
Because they have no experience with how bad life can be. And yet they have incredible experience about how bad life can be. They see everything as it is. They see it black and white. I'm going to bring in the teacher mode here. One of the biggest issues I have as a teacher is when I hear an adult say, but children are so adaptable. They can handle the bad. They just kind of get over it. They don't. That's the big secret. As teachers, we see them not handling it at all. I've dealt with kids the whole time I've been teaching, even from when I was volunteering at the school before I became an official teacher. Students whose families are falling apart, their parents are getting a divorce, they're suddenly living in two different homes. They are in trouble if they forget their backpacks at dad's house when they're living with mom the next week. And the parents come down on the kids like, you should be more organized, you should have your stuff together, you should be more responsible. And the kid just has to sit there and take it, because what else are they going to do? They're a kid. But it's really hard as a teacher not to bite your tongue and say, well, maybe you as an adult should have been more responsible with your relationship. Maybe you as an adult should give your kid a break and make sure they have their backpack, because that's your job, not their job. Kids are exposed to a real world that is horrific to them, and they have no real control over it. No matter how hard they try, they have no control. They never know from one day to the next where they're going to live, who's going to take care of them. I watched an interview that you sent me of Stephen King, and he said that was one of the things he worried about growing up, because his father had left, and he worried what would happen to me if my mother died.
What does it mean if you have to grow up without a father?
It means that you're a little more insecure, I think, than you would be otherwise. You only have the one parent. And I used to wonder what would happen to me if my mother should die when I was a kid. I'd be an orphan, and I wasn't sure exactly what that would mean, to be an orphan.
There's no control there. And so he uses kids, I think, because they are the epitome of living a life out of control. Yet they know they're supposed to be loved. They know they're supposed to be taken care of. They know there's supposed to be some kind of anchor for them, but that's not always the case for them.
Overall story structure, is there anything else that stands out regarding how Stephen King writes or what his stories are about?
I think there is a big theme with men coming to grips with what is expected of them. There is that masculinity, what is expected of me as a man. Unfortunately, there's also a twinge of sexism where whenever one of his characters is trying to figure out how to be a man, they tend to degrade women at the same time. You'll see that in Christine. One of the things in the book that he mentions is that every car is considered a woman, and yet every man that works on the car at the garage curses at the car using feminine nouns or feminine designations, cursing at them, threatening them. Everything is about threatening the female. And I think that's why when he was writing Carrie, it was such a departure, even though it's his first published novel. It is a departure because you see him really at the start trying to work with a girl learning how to become a woman in finding her power. Now it's deadly power that kills a bunch of people, but it's still power. So when he's talking about Carrie, she's coming into her power. She's going through her very late puberty. That's also another key, is that late development. Mm-hmm. And for her, coming into her power is not just standing up to her mother. It's not just standing up to her peers. It is destroying them, which is a very extreme reaction. But then she was treated with an extreme disregard her whole life.
Do you think you mentioned a twinge of sexism, and I admit I haven't read much Stephen King. I've read a little bit of The Shining. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fiction reader, but
No.
I've watched King's adaptations over and over again. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, as is the case with The Shining, what is on the page and what's on the screen are very different things. Would you say that the sexism is glorified in the books, or would you say it's something he shows as a flaw in his characters?
He uses it as a flaw in his characters. The woman is not portrayed as weak, but and in fact, one of the things that really ticks his male characters off is when women are strong. Mm-hmm. They want to remove that strength from women. Whereas Stanley Kubrick, when he created The Shining, his whole plan was to make her as weak and as miserable as possible. I mean, everybody knows the stories about how he treated Shelley Long, right? No, not Shelley Long. Shelley Duvall. Yeah. Everybody knows the stories about how he treated Shelley Duvall. To the point where she was close to having a nervous breakdown. She was losing her hair. She was losing weight. I mean, he wrecked her. And he did it for his own purposes, which is just beyond the pale.
Nobody even said roll video.
There's no desperation. Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're killing ourselves out here, and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
Should we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door. No, I can't
Yeah, but when you
hear.
came in like this, you said just
We're sitting there because they say, wait a minute, and then you say on the radio,
but when you
go.
do it, you've got to look desperate, Shelley. You're just wasting everybody's time there.
I can't even get this door open.
I mean, as a director, you don't have the right to be abusive to a cast member. I don't care what kind of performance you're trying to get out of them. That's really not appropriate. That's not right. And the sad thing to me is that all of these people who were on the set, nobody stood up for her, which is truly sad. But yeah, for Kubrick's interpretation of this, he made her a very weak woman. In King's interpretation of this woman, she is a strong, loving, caring woman who is desperately trying to make sure that her son has a 2-parent household, who is desperately trying to make sure her husband is safe, not only in real life or in the life around him, but from himself, because he's self-destructive. But she is also really considering, what do I do if I leave this man? I have to somehow find a way to get a job. I have to be able to take care of my child. She even considers for a while, if I ask for a divorce, I'm going to have to ask for support just for a little bit until I can get a job and take care of our son myself. She doesn't want to go to her mom. Her mom is basically her husband's counterpart. The husband and mother-in-law hate each other, but they're almost identical as a person. They're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's something he brings up in one of his, I think it's the second part of the series I was watching with him, but he talks about morality, so that's why I question about the sexism. He said something interesting, which I'm curious both from a writer's perspective and a Christian perspective, looking at this statement. But he says, someone asked him, do you feel a responsibility when discussing violence? Do you feel you're responsible? Same question artists always ask. Do you feel that you're inspiring violence, you're inspiring horrific acts, and do you take into account the responsibility? And he said, I don't have a responsibility for what someone does. And he says, when I sit behind a typewriter, I become amoral.
But aren't you afraid that you are, with your movies and your books, inspiring adults to use violence?
No, I don't think so. My belief is that films and books make an easy whipping boy for society. It's easy to point the finger and say, well, you see why this violence is going on in Northern Ireland. You see why these race riots are going on in Watts. The most recent example here in America was a film called Colors, where a lot of people said, if you show this movie, the gang violence is going to be incredible. Well, the problem with gang violence in America doesn't have anything to do with the movies. It has everything to do with hard drugs, rock cocaine in specific. If you are looking for an excuse to ignore the real problem and treat a symptom, you can treat the movies or the books. It's like killing the messenger because he brings you a message you don't like. I can't take responsibility for the lunatics of the world, and I won't take responsibility for the lunatics of the world, and I won't allow myself to be blamed for aberrant behavior by people who are mentally unstable. With The Shining, which is a story about a man who gives in to his psychotic impulses, tries to kill his wife and his child, are we to say, we can't show this, we can't tell stories like this, because somebody might do something like that, when we know it reflects the world as it is?
But I mean, while sitting in front of your typewriter, now you're thinking about the moral task you have as an author in society?
No, question of morals never enters the writing of my fiction. Once I sit down in front of the typewriter, I become an amoral being. Later, when I'm done, there have been times when I have changed things only, for instance, in one of the novels, there was a description of a man who built a time bomb and blew some people up. I researched the subject and found out how you build a time bomb. But I took most of that out because my job was to write a story, not to leave an instruction manual for somebody who might actually want to build one. And that's a different area. There I sense a responsibility. But I think that my responsibility as an artist is only to tell the truth. And if that truth involves violent behavior as a result of a situation, then I must tell that truth. Otherwise, I begin to lie, and that's when I become an immoral being.
What do you think about the concept of, and that's a big question, but the concept of a writer claiming to be amoral in his storytelling, and what do you think about his responsibility to tell the truth? Because some people would look at his films, in Christian audiences and say the way he portrays, religion is negative, or the way that he portrays fill in the blank is inspiring kids to do this or adults to do this.
Okay.
Where he would see it as saying, I'm just showing this is what people are like. This is what some people in these situations do. This is what an alcoholic does. I know kind of what my thoughts are on it, but I'm curious what your thoughts are about his position there.
Okay, first let's start with how writers write. When we write and our characters are on the page, the characters at times take over. And it's a really hard concept for non-writers to understand. But sometimes when you're writing a scene, it goes in a completely different direction than what you expected it to. It's a cause and effect kind of thing. But really, when you're in the middle of writing a scene and all of a sudden your character does something and it shocks you as a writer, it's almost like they're a living, breathing creature right there on the page in front of you, and you really don't have any control over what they're doing.
So in that sense, they act according to their moral compass as opposed to yours.
Absolutely. It is all about their moral compass. However, writers also have the ability to go in and correct mistakes. So if you don't like the way your scene turned out, if you don't like the way your character went in that direction, you can go back into that character's past and change their past. We are the ultimate time travelers. You can go back and change that character's past so that they don't follow that pathway. Okay? That's a legitimate thing. My biggest moral concern as a Bible-believing Christian with Stephen King is not him portraying immorality, because mankind is sinful. Mankind is basically evil with a smatter of good in there, smattering of good. My biggest issue with him is one he would make fun of me for, and that is his choice of language for his dialogue.
Okay.
I do like Stephen King's writing very much. I get frustrated with the constant F-bombs, the constant cursing. One of the reasons I get frustrated at two levels. One is because I really don't want that in my brain. I don't need it in my brain. I have actually trained my brain to kind of skip over some words sometimes. But the other reason is because it's sloppy. I mean, when you're writing, that's one of the first things you learn as a writer is don't repeat words. If you're going to say, today I had a bunch of kids reading an essay to me in class, and it was a comparison contrast essay. And they would say, here's a comparison, and here's a comparison, and here's a comparison. And the first thing you do is mark through all those comparisons. But if you have a writer using the F-bomb over and over and over again on one page. It just gets repetitive and it loses any punch it would have had in the first place. So there's really no reason for it. But he does it because that's the way his characters would speak.
Yeah.
I actually have the same problem with John Steinbeck. I love John Steinbeck's writing, but every time one of his characters opens his mouth, it's like a sewer.
So what would you say to what I would assume he would say, which is that's how characters would talk, or that's how people in the world talk?
But not people in the real world don't talk like that all the time. I mean, in his books, people are talking like that. Waiters in restaurants, people at the gas station. I mean, I go out among the people. I mean, I'm not like sitting around in my house just doing nothing. I go out and people don't come up to me and go, hey, how the blank you doing this blankety blank day? How's that blank going? I mean, that doesn't happen.
Okay.
So it's not really realistic. I mean, I can see that kind of conversation taking place.
So a particular character talking a certain way, as opposed to...
Yeah, talking a certain way to another particular character, but not to a random stranger, not to a a family, not to a man who has his kid with him.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hear that. You wouldn't see that.
No, I see, because I think that's one of the things we watched the new It together, and that was one thing. One thing I enjoyed about the movie was, the idea of kids trying to sound adult. And so the one character, I don't remember his name, but the kid that was on Stranger Things, in the film, he's always saying bad words or crude jokes. And to me, that's humorous because, that's a lot of kids that you'll run into is they want to say the edgy thing or the adult word, but it never quite flows in a sentence. But I can see what you're saying with, a waiter doesn't come to your table and, say
so what
like
the
that.
Blank can I get for you today? Yeah, blanky blank. It's
So-
like, it doesn't happen.
So Stephen King's structure, his story, the way he writes, let's take that into the film world. So that's primarily what we're talking about.
Sure.
Have you seen a bunch of Stephen King movies? I know we've watched some, but have you?
I have watched a few.
What have you watched? What
I've
movies?
watched Christine.
Okay. Great movie.
Okay. Better book. I've watched The Shining.
Movie.
I watched both of them. I watched the Stanley Kubrick one with you, and I thought it was excellent as a standalone movie.
Did you read it before or did you watch it before
I watched
the book?
it before I read The Shining. Then I read The Shining, and I was like, what did he do? Why in the world would he make the choices that he made in his movie making? I was confounded as to why he made some of the choices he made. The end of the book is so brutal and so spectacular. Why in the world would you have it end with a whimper and a frozen, guy in a maze? Which, by the way, in the book there is no maze. They're topiary animals that are scary as all get out.
They come to life.
They
right?
come to life and try to kill people.
Spoiler.
It's amazing. Hey, guys, if you haven't read all these Stephen King books and you haven't why are you listening to this? Anyway.
I haven't read all the books, but...
You need to.
But...
I read them. You can read them. But if you haven't read them and you are not a big reader, I strongly suggest that you do an Audible and Amazon Kindle pack. Because Amazon Kindle, if you buy the book on Amazon, you can get the Audible for a discount.
Bounce back and
yes.
forth.
So you can get it for under $20 for both formats.
So Christine,
it's worth doing it.
The Shining.
And The Mist.
The Mist?
Yes, which the ending of The Mist, so much better than the book. The movie is fantastic.
Spoil that.
Oh, okay. Too bad. Misery with you.
Misery.
That was very well done. I do need to read the book. I haven't read that yet. And
It's King's favorite that he's written.
I can't wait to read it.
We watched a little bit of Under the Dome.
Oh my word! Under the Dome was so bad. The best
first
thing in
episode
that,
was good.
best thing in that was the cow,
Which is a
cut in
woodchuck
half.
in the book. I guess. I was listening to an interview. That's what he said. Which I want to see a woodchuck get cut in half.
How would you even notice?
I don't know. Yeah. Countless insect life and small rodents that were hurt.
That's funny.
Under the Dome, Green Mile, Shawshank
Oh
Redemption.
yeah, love Green Mile. Shawshank Redemption, they made them so likable in that. You read all the stuff, facts from the book versus the movie, and you're like, some of the people that you feel really compassionate towards in the movie are really
Not so
horrible in
much.
the book. You're just like, whoa. Okay.
So, in the Stephen King world, we touched on this earlier. Sometimes a good movie isn't a good Stephen King adaptation.
That's
and
true.
sometimes a good adaptation's not a great movie. At least that's what I hear about Maximum Overdrive. Out of those movies that you've talked about, you'd say most of those are pretty good films, or is there one that you think is...
Oh, I did not like Christine.
She is seductive. She is passionate. She is possessive. She is pure evil. She is Christine, a 1958 Plymouth Fury, possessed by hell. Her previous owner is not alive to warn her present one. Once she lures you behind the wheel, you will be hers, body and soul. There is no place you can hide, no place you can run, and nothing you can do can stop her. Because how do you kill something that can't possibly be alive? Christine, body by Plymouth, soul by Satan.
I did not. I know you liked it, and I love you. You're so
But the
pumpkin.
lens, but the lens flares.
Who bloody
and the-
cares? Okay, listen. I didn't care for Christine. I thought that the main actor, he was hard for me to watch. I just had a hard time watching him.
See,
He
he's
was
what made the
just-
movie for me, was the way he went full throttle into the character and just... Okay. Okay, so that's the only one that you'd say you really were like...
I really didn't like it. And if it comes to an adaptation, I don't think The Shining is very good. Shining.
I'm getting to that.
Okay. But I think I really do think that the Steven Weber performance in The Shining that Stephen King directed was excellent.
Our greatest fears are all around us, hiding in nightmares, shrouded in evil, waiting to be unleashed.
You shine on, boy.
Shine on?
The Bible calls it having vision. I can feel it coming off you like heat.
From Stephen King, the creator of It, The Tommyknockers, and The Stand, comes a completely new vision of terror.
Seize your destiny, Mr. Torrance.
Jack?
Coming, sweetheart.
Are you gonna hurt me, Daddy?
Come down here and take your medicine! Oh, my God.
You're never taking my son!
This spring,
Brandy!
go to hell and pray you get out alive. Rebecca De Mornay, Steven Weber.
Daddy's mad at Mommy.
Stephen King's The Shining.
In fact, when it came out, it got full 5-star rating from TV Guide. I don't know why it gets all this hate. I think it gets all this hate just because people are so attached to the original.
Well, it's
Shining
become
movie.
something of its own where, just Jack Nicholson, the door is so iconic.
It is iconic, but when you're talking about adaptation, the second one is better. The TV
Sure.
version is better.
Sure. Having read the books,
Mm-hmm.
or at least some of the 70 or 90
Right.
books, having read some of the books, which movie that you've seen is the most faithful adaptation?
I just told you. The second Shining.
That would
It's
be
spot on, yes.
Okay.
And The Mist is very well done. It's very close to the book. I really enjoyed it. But again, I think the ending of the book was kind of a whimper.
Mm-hmm.
The ending of the movie was a bang.
Would you say The Mist? Would you say that with an adaptation, do you think it's more important to stay true to every beat of the story, or is it important to stay true to the spirit? Because many would say The Mist stays true to the spirit of the story, at least from what I've heard. But
It stays really close to the entire story. It's like beat after beat after beat, with the exception of the ending.
with an improvement.
Yes, the improvement at the end.
Because I know some people get upset, there's people that hate Lord of the Rings because they left out, small portions where they talk about geography in the books or things like that. So there's
Right.
people that want extremely faithful. For you, what's most important for an adaptation to carry over?
Don't take something out just to add something else that
Okay.
has nothing to do with the story, that just derails the plot.
Okay.
We don't need you to add your little extra flourish as a director when you have so much good material to work with. We understand, readers who watch movies, we understand that stuff has to get cut out. We get that. We're not stupid. We're, intelligent human beings. We read, for crying out loud. But don't take out an important part of the story and add something that's your personal little take on it that doesn't drive the story forward.
So is there a King adaptation that you feel really pulls all the beats out of the story? And I mean, I guess The Shining would be the perfect example of that, but The Shining still works as a movie.
Yes.
So why do you enjoy The Shining even though it butchers the book?
Because it stands alone as a good movie with a different theme. The theme of The Shining for Kubrick is it's all about the man, the father. Mm-hmm. It's all about his personal struggle. And
the book is more about...
It's about the boy.
Okay.
It's about this little kid trying to figure out where he stands. The father is a part of it. The mother is a part of it.
But their background to Danny then.
Yeah. Yes. They're all concerned about him, but he knows their minds, which is a terrifying thing as a parent.
Sure.
You want to talk about real horror?
And not
your
something
child
they really
knows
get
what
into
you're thinking.
in the movie.
Right. Although I will say, in The Shining, the child actor that they have for Kubrick's version is top notch. You couldn't ask for a better actor. He was fantastic.
And in many ways, it is his movie still, just in different ways. We're following him through the hotel and going.
Yeah, that never happens.
The little tricycle?
No, that's not part
which
of it.
is the best part of the movie, is his little rides upstairs.
That tells you everything you need to know right there. You want to know the truth about the Shining movie and with Stanley Kubrick?
Yes.
It's all
We've been
about...
waiting.
It is all about him.
It's all about Kubrick?
It's all about Kubrick.
That's okay.
It's fine. But you know what? Don't mess with somebody else's source material. If you want to write a movie about yourself, then write it about yourself. But don't take a fantastically written book like The Shining with all of the imagery and the motifs, the themes, everything you can want, the horror, the absolute hair-raising horror of that movie or of that book, and turn it into a kid running around on a tricycle. That's not right. Danny was like a 5 to 6 year old little boy who went out snowshoeing and went out to the playground, and the animals that were the topiary tried to kill him. That's scary, my friend. That's way scarier than the 2 little girls. But by the way, they're not twins. Can we just stop saying that? That just irritates me too. I'm sorry. I'm starting to get all ranty now.
Okay, well, that's fine. Let's go a little quick fire on this then. So
go for it.
Come up with a question on top of my head. Best performance in a Stephen King movie.
Ew.
Well, let's do best character in a book, and then best performance in a movie.
Okay, I'll say best performance is Kathy Bates.
Okay, in Misery?
In Misery.
I'm sorry, Paul. This is all wrong.
What?
You'll have to do it over again. It's not worthy of you. Throw it all out. Except for that part of naming the gravedigger after me. You can leave that in.
I really value your criticism, but maybe we're being a little hasty here.
Paul, what you've written just isn't fair.
Not fair.
That's right. When I was growing up in Bakersfield, my favorite thing in all the world was to go to the movies on Saturday afternoons for the chapter plays.
Cliffhangers.
I know that, Mr. Man. They also call them serials. I'm not stupid, you know. Anyway, my favorite was Rocket Man. And once it was a no-brakes chapter. And the bad guys stuck him in a car on a mountain road and knocked him out and welded the doors shut and tore out the brakes and started him to his death. And he woke up and tried to steer and tried to get out, but the car went off a cliff before he could escape. And it crashed and burned, and I was so upset and excited. And the next week, you better believe I was first in line. And they always start with the end of the last week. And there was Rocket Man trying to get out. And here comes the cliff. And just before the car went off the cliff, he jumped free. And all the kids cheered. But I didn't cheer. I stood right up and started shouting, "This isn't what happened last week! Have you all got amnesia? They just cheated us! This isn't fair! He didn't get out of the cock-a-doodie car!"
I thought she did a fantastic job.
Yeah, she's scary. Better than Jack Nicholson scary?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing. I'm just asking.
I think he was scary just because he was the...
Jack Nicholson?
No, I think he was scary because he was the man of the family, and they didn't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
You know, she was scary because, I mean, she was a wackadoo. I mean, she had the guy tied to his bed.
This is the most time wackadoo is going to be said on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I think we should say wackadoo all the time. But yeah, she was terrifying in a whole different way. I mean, she was a subtle. She wasn't. You're going to do what I say, or I'm going to kill you. She was. You know, she did things out of what she considered to be mother love kind of thing.
Okay, and that's best character in the book.
I haven't read the book. I've watched the movie.
So best character in a book then.
Best character in the book. Ooh, I really liked Carrie.
Yeah, her as a character.
Her as a character, I thought it was excellent. I think she was a fully realized character who was very self-aware. She realized that when she was asked to the prom by the gentleman, I can't remember his name, that it could be a setup.
Yeah.
And she
was never ignorant.
She was never ignorant. She was not a mousy little thing. She never was. No. She had to put up with an abusive mom, and she survived the way kids do. You keep your head down and you just keep.
She was
you
sort
go
of
to your
just
prayer closet.
a caged beast.
She really was.
In a lot of ways.
Right. And it wasn't until she became mature that she felt that she could. That's when she realized that what her mom was teaching her wasn't on the up and up. And that she could stand up and say, no, what you're doing is wrong, and I'm going to get out of here. I mean, she had an exit plan before the prom.
It's a big empowerment story.
It is.
Scariest Stephen King story. And scariest movie. So we'll
here's my problem. I don't get really scared from
of anything.
Movies.
Books?
Books, I really don't get scared from books.
Okay, what's...
I'm sorry. That's just the way it is.
No, I'm with you. It's very rare that a movie really sits with me, and...
Yeah, that's why.
I mean, The Shining. Depending on when I watch it,
there's scary elements to it, but I'm not laying awake at night. It was funny because when I told somebody I was reading these Stephen King books, she said, "How do you sleep at night?" And I'm like, "Really well. They're not they're not that scary.
Story.
Yeah, they're horror stories, but it's really more psychological to me than gore. I mean, there's not a lot of gore. I mean, I haven't seen Carrie yet. I'm sure there's a lot of gore in there with the pig blood, but." Yeah, when it comes to the scariest story, I've got to say, well, Shining is way up there from the wife's point of view.
That's realistic, yeah.
It's incredibly realistic.
So it's not the supernatural elements that are scary. It's the alcoholism and the...
It's dealing with a husband whose alcoholism and temper are out of control.
Yeah.
That is terrifying. And knowing that your child has already been hurt once, and there's a possibility that could happen again. And you told me that the sequel, it's about the little boy growing up and he's afraid he's going to be like his dad.
I haven't read it, but from what I hear.
Because it repeats what Jack Torrance went through when he was growing up. His dad was abusive. He loved his dad, crazy about his father. But his dad used to play a game with him called Elevator. And so dad would drink. He was an alcoholic. He was a nurse. And then he'd come home after a long shift. He'd be drinking.
He wasn't a writer?
No. But he'd come home after a long bout of drinking, and Jack would be on the floor playing with his little toys and stuff, and Dad would pick him up and say, "Elevator," and pull him up over his head. But if his dad was too drunk, he'd let go, and Jack would fall over Dad's head onto the floor below. Mm-hmm. So he was a child who loved his father, but knew that his father could hurt him or potentially kill him. He watched his father almost kill the mom at the dinner table. And so when Jack becomes an adult, as much as he doesn't want to be his dad, he does have a lot of those elements. Although he's trying to keep his family together, he really does love his wife. But his wife, who has been in a relationship with her mom that's very complicated because it's a lot like Jack, she loves her husband. She's a very well-developed character. But her journey is probably one of the most terrifying journeys you could find in literature, because she's trying to do everything that's right, but he is the unknown factor, and it's the man she sleeps with.
Yeah, I think that's why King and George Romero got along so well, is because I think their biggest thing was always, Romero always said, the biggest monster lives next door to us. The monsters are us, not zombies, not whatever.
My zombies will never take over the world because I need the humans. The humans are the sort of the ones that I dislike the most, and they're where the trouble really lies. The zombies are just sort of, a lot of mosquitoes out to them.
And I think that's why him and King had such a symbiotic relationship with films was, and I think that's why they worked together was so well, was their idea that the worst thing that can happen is a bad person, you know,
Right.
and so everything else is circumstantial. A hotel, you know,
Mhm.
scary, whatever. It's usually the person you're going to sleep next to.
Right.
Two more quick fire questions,
Sure.
and then I'll close out.
Sorry,
the
that wasn't very
episode.
quick fire, was it? I just went on.
It 1990 or It remake?
1990, hands down, all the time. I'd watch it. I would watch it repeatedly.
Okay.
Over the remake. The remake stinks.
I don't think the remake stinks on second viewing.
Okay.
But I agree that the other one's a stronger movie. And would you say it's closer to King's book? Which one's closer to King? Or is neither really close to King's
Here's the
book?
problem. I didn't really like the book.
Yeah.
But I felt that the TV movie was scarier.
Was scarier than the book.
Way scarier. Tim Curry was very, very scary.
Yeah, and I think it's funny though, since you brought that up about, you know, the monster living next door,
Mhm.
living with us. Tim Curry's Pennywise it seemed like a creepy guy pretending to be a clown.
Right.
And I think in the remake, which I didn't find scary at all, it's very much the demonic appearance of the clown.
Right.
And I think seeing something that we recognize the creepy uncle factor of
Mhm.
Pennywise from
Right.
the 1990. You know, seeing his mouth open up in the fangs, that wasn't what was scary about. And I think they doubled down on that in the remake. And I think that's what made him less effective. But now I'm going to think about that.
Well, Pennywise is scary.
Yeah.
But everything else they're going through is scarier.
Yeah. Well, the scariest things in the remake for me was the stuff with Barb, with her Barb, right? That's the girl.
I think so.
So
And with her
the
father.
girl with her
yes.
father, and the way the pharmacist acts toward her, and the way men leer over this teenage girl.
Right.
That stuff's really scary to me.
That is terrifying. Yeah.
You know, the effects and the scary moments where Pennywise is shaking or whatever, that stuff
Mhm.
didn't get me. And I almost feel like there was a better movie in the kids by themselves than in the movie with Pennywise. Like, I feel like the It remake works better without the Pennywise they had in that movie.
Right.
I think Tim Curry's Pennywise in that movie, you'd have a...
It would be a mind blower. I thought
Yeah.
the kids were good actors. I wasn't happy about some of the dialogue. And I wasn't happy. Well, see, this is where you get with the book. They don't put everything in the movies that they put in the book
Well,
because they can't.
Yeah.
And if they did, there would be, you know, theaters being burned down because of it. Because it's really sad. And it's actually one of my pet peeves as a parent, as a teacher, this normalization of sexuality for children. I really have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately part of literature. It's not a welcome part of literature. It's not a part that I will take sitting down. I hate it. So I really, this is the one thing, I was so turned off by it that I didn't read another Stephen King novel until you asked me to read some for this podcast.
Drag you back in?
You dragged me back in. But I was so frustrated with the way he treated the end of that book. I was so mad. And but he's not the only one. I mean, I read several
It's a pretty
books.
common trope.
And it's
in
wrong.
some ways,
and
yeah.
I don't understand why we keep glamorizing it. I really don't.
So would you say there's boundaries authors shouldn't cross in the type of material that they cover?
Yes.
Okay. Is it more what they should cover or how it's covered? We'll say pedophilia, which isn't what's in it. But I mean, it's hinted at with the father.
Okay.
But I know what scene you're referring to, and anyone
Right.
listening does, so we don't need to spend too much time describing it. But say pedophilia, it can be dealt with,
True.
right? Or
Yeah.
do you think, or rape can be dealt with?
It can be dealt with, yes.
But would you say it's how it's dealt with?
How it's dealt with is very important. One of the books that's on like every list of books you should read, you know, as a literature person, is 100 Years of Solitude.
Okay.
And there are repeated instances of pedophilia in the story where it is considered acceptable by this family, and it's not acceptable. And it hurts the kids, but not in a way that you would know that it hurts the kids. It's just the whole family's nuts. But it's enough to make you just like, why would you put this in there? Why would you need
So the
to
author is too ambiguous about his position.
I don't think he is too ambiguous. I think his position is pro.
Okay.
That's where I got out of it. I'm sure some people would not agree with that. I don't care.
Sure. So, yeah, no, I'm always curious about that because that's a conversation I know that me and my wife Tara always have is, you know, we talk about rape or about, you know, different topics movies can show and what you know, there can be a scene with a rape where they show a lot and it doesn't feel exploitative, you know, and there can be a rape where they show very little, but it feels, you know, very mean-spirited. You know, not that rape ever doesn't feel mean-spirited, but the way it's visually shown or the way the story uses it, you know. One thing that bothers me is when a TV show or movie will use it just to, as like that's the only thing that can break a female character down in a movie,
Right.
as opposed to something important to their development. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so, you know, I think sometimes movies that are looked at as, you know, degrading aren't so much, and movies where they say, well, they didn't show anything, or
That doesn't mean,
you know,
well, look at Gone with the Wind. I mean, that's been a controversial movie since it's been out.
they said damn
but-
on a movie. You know?
Oh, yeah. That's not what took me off about that. What took me off is when, you know, her husband is saying, let's go to bed. And she's like, no, no, no. And he picks her up and forces her up. He picks her up and carries her up the stairs. It is implied. She has said no.
Yeah.
He said, we're doing this, honey. This is what's going to happen. And the next morning she wakes up all aglow. Like, oh, that was like the best night of sex I ever had. And it's like, no, honey, you were raped. You know,
Yeah.
if you said no and your husband forced you into a sexual position, that's not good.
Yeah.
Let's not glorify that in a movie.
Yeah.
So that's really frustrating to me.
Anyway, so wrapping up, I want to do our autopsy segment,
Okay.
and I want to do a bloody good movie recommendation. So
Oh,
for this,
okay.
I'm going to do a bloody good movie that's a Stephen King movie and
Okay.
recommend it, and then you will do a bloody good movie and recommend it. and
Okay,
then
but you can't choose mine.
What are you going to choose? Go ahead first.
Okay, I'll go first. The Mist. I know he's shocked by
You have
that.
to say the bloody good movie is.
The bloody good movie is The Mist.
Whoa. Mom, Dad, you gotta come see. The birdhouse is all bashed. You just gotta... Come on. Whoa.
Having spoken, the doomsayer departs.
Come on.
Why don't you get Billy dressed? I'll take him into town with me. Hit the store before it gets all bought out.
How'd you folks hold up in the storm?
Big insurance day.
Sorry to hear that.
What's going on? It's death.
Something in the mist! Shut the doors! Shut the doors!
The only way we're going to help ourselves is to seek rescue.
Tie this around your waist.
Before.
Let us know you got at least 300 feet.
There's nothing out there. Nothing in the mist.
What if you're wrong?
Then I guess the joke would be on me.
It is time to take sides. Read the good book. It calls for blood.
Guys, I hear something.
Are those bugs?
Not like any I've ever seen. The entire front of this door is plate glass.
Promise you won't let the monsters get me.
What are you guys messing with up there?
I thought that there were other dimensions. They wanted to try and make a window.
Well, maybe your window turned out to be a door.
Who she's gonna sacrifice to make it all better?
We want the board.
You try it.
Kill him!
One of the things I really love about it, I like a good bare stage play and a closed door mystery. I do. I'm a sucker for them. But for The Mist, there's very few outside scenes, and the most of it takes place within a grocery store with a bunch of different people. So you've got a composite of people learning how to survive a mystery. He just did an eye roll. That was great. Okay. But I strongly recommend it, especially if you've read the book. This will give you a more satisfying ending.
Have you seen it in black and white?
In The Mist? No.
You should watch it in black and white.
Oh,
It plays like an
okay.
old 50s monster movie. It's really cool.
Okay.
And I will recommend my bloody good movie is...
You were going to say The Mist, weren't you?
You know what? I'm going to say Carrie.
It's the night of the senior prom. The Bates High School gym is alive with excitement. Everybody is there, even Carrie White, the girl no one likes.
We're all sorry about this incident, Cassie.
It's Carrie!
And everyone makes fun of. The girl who lives in that creepy house with her crazy mother.
Help the sinning woman see the sin of her days and ways. Show her that if she had remained sinless, the curse of blood would never have come on her.
The girl with the strange power.
If I concentrate hard enough, I can move things.
But tonight, no one will laugh at Carrie.
If you don't have a date for the prom next Friday, would you like to go with me?
She's with the best-looking boy in the senior class.
He's trying to trick me again.
She'll be voted queen of the prom.
You know, I can make sure that you don't hurt Carrie White anymore.
For Carrie, it will be a dream come true. For everyone else, it will be a nightmare. Carrie. A new film by Brian De Palma. Based on the chilling bestseller. Starring Sissy Spacek, Piper Laurie, and introducing John Travolta in his first motion picture role. If you have a taste for terror, you have a date with Carrie.
The more I watch Carrie, the more it moves up my list. It's probably right neck and neck with... No, it's not near The Shining. I don't know. It's really up there, though. It's moved from, like, 5th to, like, 4th to 3rd. It just keeps climbing. It's more than Misery, I think, on my last viewing. So,
okay.
I recommend Carrie.
And thank you for lending it to me. I will watch it this week.
You should watch it. It's really good.
I'm looking forward to it.
So Carrie's going to be my bloody good movie. And then, real quick, and we're going to close on this.
Okay.
Because we've gone so long.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to do a quick autopsy.
Okay, you do that.
You haven't seen the movie.
What is it?
I don't want to say the name yet. I want to give context.
Okay.
So I want to talk about really quick, because you've talked about The Shining, why The Shining doesn't work as an adaptation.
Right.
I want to talk about a film that Stephen King wrote. So he wrote the screenplay. It was not based on a book.
Okay.
Okay. George Romero directed it.
Okay.
2 things that should make me like the movie.
Yes.
It is a super loved movie, and I get why people like it, but I do not. And I've tried to watch it over and over and over again. I'm giving a lot of context. People really like this movie. Creepshow. Okay. We have to talk about Creepshow.
Coming soon. Jolting tales of horror. Creepshow. From the author of Carrie, The Shining, and Cujo. And the creator of Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. You'll scream at ghastly ghouls. Cringe at weird kids. And shiver at the doings of evil doctors.
This is going to be extremely painful, Mr. Verrill.
Creepshow will grab you, grow on you, and give you the creeps.
No, this is going to be an entirely new experience.
Creepshow, the most fun you'll ever have being scared.
I thought you loved that movie.
No.
When you were in high school, you watched it repeatedly.
Because I wanted to love it. I love George Romero.
I see.
The issue with Creepshow is it's based on EC Comics.
Right.
And that vibe. I love Tales from the Crypt. Very good show. I love...
Yep, I watched a lot of those too.
A lot of Tales from the Crypt. Creepshow doesn't work because it is such a frame for frame adaptation of the kind of material that Stephen King read. It's the biggest argument for not making a straight comic book feeling movie is Creepshow.
Okay.
Everything is done with these exaggerated effects and these and things that would work on the page, which I haven't read the print version of Creepshow that came after the movie. I'm sure it plays better.
Okay.
Where Tales from the Crypt did really well is they did cartoony people or a cartoony environment, but the format of the show was a cinematic show. Creepshow plays like a comic book, and that doesn't work for a 2-hour movie. And the other big issue with these, my quick assessment, is where Tales from the Crypt and EC Comics succeeded is the moral storyline behind it, where there was a very strong purpose and meaning to every story. There was something you could take away, like a Twilight Zone or something like that.
Right.
What can we learn? Creepshow is just bizarre stories that stand alone and string together with no rhyme or reason. And so Creepshow just dies when I watch it. It just except for so all of Creepshow doesn't work for me except for the raft scene in Creepshow 2. You have no idea what I'm talking about, but I'm going to tell you. I'm very excited about it.
You're, excited about
it's
plots.
Creepshow 2.
Okay.
Because it's very heavy on the moral compass of its characters.
Okay.
And the last story of Creepshow, the original Creepshow, with E.G. Marshall, because E.G. Marshall, and the cockroach storyline, which I'm not going to spoil, but if you don't watch Creepshow, you can skip to that. Also, see, now I'm backtracking. Leslie Nielsen's bit in Creepshow's good too. But that's the thing, it's good bits in a movie,
Okay.
Great actors, like you have great moments, Stephen King's cameo or things like that. But overall, just kind of...
Okay. Use your words.
So anyway, is there anything else you want to add about Stephen King? We've talked for probably the longest amount of time that the show's ever been recorded.
Yeah. We told your dad it was going to take us like a half an hour.
Yeah.
We've been in here for
my
like
dad
an hour
and
now.
my wife are in the next room.
Talking,
the
playing
audience
with the
has
baby.
heard a baby crying the whole time. So anyway,
I do enjoy his writing quite a lot. I will continue to read his books. Again, I have a strong moral compass. I can recognize the characters' strong moral compasses.
Mr. Fancy Pants.
No, it's not. It's not even like that. I mean, I think everybody should have a strong stand of where they believe.
You can't go into any book without bringing your worldview along with you.
Of course not.
Yeah.
If you did, you'd just kind of be a sad little person whose worldview changes with every page.
Don't be a sad little person.
Don't be a sad little person. Know your stuff.
Happy little person.
Have a good foundation and go from there. We all have. This is my thing. There is only one story in the world, but it belongs to all of us. So let's just read everything we can get our hands on.
Did you write that before we did this? I've never
Yes,
heard you
I actually
say that.
wanted for a poster in my room. No, there is only one story, but I like the idea that one story encompasses everybody and everything. So let's just read. Be a voracious reader.
Oh, so unifying. I can't say anything good after that. All right, well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for coming on and talking. I know you have to see me at least once in a while because you're my mom, but thanks for doing the podcast.
I adore you.
Even though you skipped out on the Psycho podcast.
There's a reason for that.
So anyway, that's it for today. Don't forget to don't forget.
Please like me.
Don't forget.
Be my buddy.
Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or however you listen to the show. SoundCloud, Pippa, wherever. I was looking at stats. There's like a billion different podcast hosts. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review on iTunes. That helps me a ton with ranking. And if you want to purchase anything we talked about on the show, be sure to use the link in the description. It gives a little kickback to me, and that's always appreciated. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.